Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the
The
flag
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Ms. Korpowitz?
Mr. Richard Boutz? Sorry. Mr. Richard Boutz?
He does show there. He shows on mute.
Okay.
Oh, he's off now.
Okay. Mr. Richard Boutz? Mrs. Rita Spinelli?
Here.
Mr. Nathan Fuller?
Here.
Mr. Jonathan Cleaver?
present.
Mr. Ed Rarick?
Here. Okay, is there, that's the agenda for tonight. We're going to talk about George's transportation daily run. To start us off here, the first thing we have is a letter from George's regarding, which I believe Barb Bose brought up in the previous board meeting, that there was a January bill missing. We did want to provide some transparency on that with George's and present that to everybody, knowing that there was some sort of computer issue with the invoice. So we did put that letter in here along with the two invoices, one for January, which we are looking to present, which is invoice 1357, which is our January 2021 activity of $44,036. And then as well, our March invoice from George's, which would be for the month that just passed, invoice 1386 for $111,690. Any questions on those invoices?
No, I did look them over and I did read the letter. Thank you, Mr. Rarick.
Yep. Next topic was a board docs LT agreement. So essentially, board docs is a management system for our board information. We'd be looking to get the board docs LT version. This is used by several other school districts. This would be used to, so the first thing this would do is it would take all of our other board information that's currently stored on our website. It would archive it and allow it to be searchable, which is a nice feature. It would allow us to store all of our agendas and policies. It would allow for a library documents to be stored. It also allows for a meta search to other similar organizational documents from other school districts. This is 100% web-based. The reoccurring fee for this annual subscription is $2,700, which we are incurring a $1,000 rebate for this year for that service. Some of the other features and benefits of this, obviously, we could save a ton of money by not producing paper packets anymore, going to more of a virtual platform. We could reduce staff time in the packet preparation and distribution because everything would become electronic. There would be some enhanced public service delivery. Obviously, all these documents would become much more readily available via the cloud. We would empower our constituents and enable them to proactively access the board information. Obviously, it's a lot easier to go in and type in a keyword and search a series of documents and be able to pull it up, as opposed to go back and look through 10 different board meetings to try and remember where that information is. And then we're going to obviously reduce our carbon footprint, reducing paper waste for the district. So it's just something we're suggesting, throwing it at the board in the upcoming board meeting as a tool to make the district more efficient and more transparent, and hopefully move in the right direction in terms of our board documents.
Mr. Eric, would this be used not only for documents for the board themselves, but also for documents that are available to the general public?
Yeah, there's an access feature that we would control what is available to the board, what is available to the public. This would also house policies, and it creates a kind of a dynamic workspace for all of our policies. So you could store old policies and new policies, and you could see what changes were made through a historical sequence. And then you could also have proposed policies on the site as well, which would show any potential changes that the district would be considering to policies.
Okay. And the same ease of use, ease of searching and all that would be available on the public documents to the public.
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes, the nice thing too is it's because it's web-based, it has social network sharing, so it can be shared with email, Facebook, Twitter, so we could get a lot of these things out there much quicker.
Okay. From a transparency perspective, it sounds good to me, and just from an ease of use, it sounds like it would be much easier to use than our website. I know I've experienced sometimes challenges finding things there, and have heard others echo the same sentiment.
Yeah, I agree, and Janine kind of spearheaded this research for us because they used it in Northwestern Lehigh. They also use it in Jim Thorpe, as well as I think Pleasant Valley uses the same system.
Okay.
So there are a couple districts around utilizing the tool, and they do like the tool. So it's just something we would like to, put towards the boards for evaluation to see what their thought is on purchasing.
All right. Yeah, I think moving along the board is a great idea. I know I would support it.
As would I.
Thank you.
That's Rusty. I'd support it as well.
I'm sorry, I missed that, Rusty.
I'd support that as well.
Okay, thank you. So this is the what I'm going to call the Lehigh Area School District draft budget presentation. This is a collection of data and information. It's kind of a bird's eye view of the data that I collected, where the district falls, some other information in here that I think would be valuable. In addition, I should have all the supporting documentation out to the board by tomorrow regarding this collection of data. So you would have the workable documents that I used to generate this slideshow. But obviously what you would receive would be much more detailed than what you're going to see here. This is kind of just a general overview of what we're looking at. So we'll go through this and then we'll field some questions at the end, because I know PFM has a presentation as well. So we'll start this presentation off. Mr. Cleaver, if you want to advance the slideshow. So just some notations. This collection of data assumes the Act 1 index of 4.2% is used in the generation of the information provided. ESSER 2 funding, which is the government subsidy for the new CARES Act, sorry, it's moving up and down there, is allocated at 62.5% for the 21-22 school year. And I do have a slide in here regarding ESSER funding at the end of the slideshow. State funding is presumed flat, which is consistent with guidance from PASBO. With all the ESSER 2 federal funding that's coming out, PASBO is providing information that the state funding is probably going to hold steady, if not slide down slightly for the next 3 years to school districts. Some other notations here. This information presumes a 93% collection of estimated local property tax revenue, which again is a slight downturn from prior years just due to COVID. Other federal funding sources are reduced based on spring guidance from PDE. So that would be our Title I, Title II, and Title IV funding. We did receive notice from the federal government that those were all reduced for the upcoming school year. And then the expenditure data that we're going to show here is compiled using our 2015 through 2020 AFR data, which I will provide in a spreadsheet to the board along with the packet. 2021 current spending, as well as data collection from the key departments and individuals within the district. So this is kind of our tax rate history. It's very difficult to see there. I don't know if you could zoom that in, Mr. Cleaver, without skewing it. So your tax rate history here at Lehighton, obviously, for those of us that have lived in the district, I'm a taxpayer, has been pretty nice. 47.32 mils back in 2011, all the way up to 47.88 mils in 2018 and 19. So not much movement in our tax rate history, other than the past couple of years, we did see a little bit of a bump in that tax information. Proposed 21-22 at the 4.2% would take us to 52.77 mils. And if you could advance the slide. You'll have to reduce that. So I just use this slide to basically show, it's another way of looking at that bar chart there. In 2011 and 12, 12, 13, 13, 14, we didn't pass along any tax increases. I put the Act 1 index there next to it. And then any revenue lost had we would have enacted that Act 1 index. So if we would have did the 1.9% back in 2011-12, the district would have seen just over $3 million in tax revenue provided to the district. So I just wanted to provide that slide in conjunction with the slide that's next to it, which kind of tells a different story from 2012 to 2019. These are our assessed values for the district, which is a little alarming. Our assessed values really haven't changed, which I think is kind of indicative of the area. There's no large developments happening. There's no major construction projects and industrial developments going on that are bringing increased assessed value to the district. So back in 2012, 390 million. In 2019, 390 million. Not much of change in our assessed value, so we're not going to just grow our tax base by increasing our assessed value. You could advance the slide. In conjunction with that, we have our fund balance, and anybody that's been in the district kind of knows our fund balance years ago, 2012, 2013, just under 14 million. $13,867,503. And then you could see each sequential year there in 2013 and 14. We took a hit of 1 million, just under $1.1 million, bringing us down to 12 million. The big year was 15-16, $6.8 million in fund balance reduction, bringing us down to 7.4 million. And it kind of trickles down to where we are today. With 19-20 school year, we did add $110,000 to the fund balance, and we're sitting right now with a fund balance of $985,205. So during that time period of little increases in revenue, on the local side, we saw a dramatic decrease in fund balance. I will note there is a $1.6 million audit adjustment, which was noted in the audit year ending June 30th, 2019. And that was for the write-off of NEF funds that were not recouped. And that was noted in that audit on page 56. So that also brought down the fund balance in the 17-18 year. It was a restatement of fund balance. You can progress the slideshow. So moving on to 21-22, this is our budgetary revenue. State revenue is 41%, local revenue is 53%, and federal revenue is 6%. So local revenue, just $22,513,000. State revenue, $17,459,000, and federal revenue, obviously including 62% of the ESSER 2 funds at $2,279,000. You could advance the slideshow, Mr. Cleaver. You're gonna have to reduce that. So this again is just kind of a recap of that. I did include the 1920 AFR data on here. So as you can see, in 1920, our local revenue was $23,130,000. 21-22 presumed local revenue does have a reduction at $22,603,000. State revenue, again, holding pretty consistent with a slight reduction based on the feedback that we're getting. So in 1920, 17,631,000 versus a proposed 21-22, 17,480,000. And then the drastic increase in federal revenue, obviously because of our ESSER 2 funding coming in from the federal government with a large jump there to 2,279,000. You could go to the next slide. So these are our major fund expenditures in the district. Regular education is 42% of our expenditures, which amounts to $18,318,000. Special education, which is function code 1200, is $7,403,000. Our debt service is 8.72%, which is 3.7 million or just under 3.8 million. Our buildings and grounds maintenance is 6.7% or just under 3 million. Our pupil transportation, this assumes a full restoration of our transportation service for our students, which I think is very important to the district. That's 3% or just right around 1.3 million. Our vocational education, again, just under 4% at 1.6 million. Our admin services, just over 2 million. And then all other, which we'll get into in the next slide, which is $6,154,000. So if we break those down even a little bit further, you can see again our regular education, which we talked about, special education, vocational education, our adult education programs, which is our LTRIC agreement, which we've approved their budget of $234,000. Our pre-kindergarten function code, we do spend $150,000 plus in there. Majority of that comes from a grant of $175,000. Pupil personnel, these are the services, our guidance services, our counseling services, $1,028,000, which again is a reduction from the 1920 AFR data. Support services, again, a slight increase to $1,045,000, which in 1920 was $1,004,000. Admin service, the 2300s does have a slight decrease again from 1920 AFR data, which was 2.1 million versus proposed 2,016,000. Our pupil health services, you can see there at 350,000. Our business office, again, a reduction to 564,000. Our building and grounds maintenance does have a slight increase. Obviously 1920 data is a little skewed because the last quarter of the year, the district was shut down. So there wasn't as much spending in the maintenance of the buildings and whatnot. So that does have a slight increase for the new year. Pupil transportation, again, an increase from 1920, but more consistent with a full year of full transportation for our students. Central and other support services, 939,000. This is a drastic increase over our 1920 AFR data, primarily because of investment in technology, which would be covered by ESSER funds. Other support services is related to IU, which is a very minimal number in terms of the budget figure, but that's $25,000. Student activities, again, very consistent with what it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 891,000 to 912,000. Construction improvement, there's no project going on at the school as of right now, so there would be no budgetary number in there for construction. Our debt service stays pretty consistent, and we do have a presentation from PFM on a reduction following this slideshow. Fund transfers, so a little bit of an explanation on fund transfers. We use that budgetary code for our food service personnel that are paid from the general fund budget, because we don't do a food service budget per se, because that's service is outsourced to the nutrition group. But we do still have several employees that are employed by the district on our books. So that's done through a fund transfer from the general fund into the food service fund. And then a budgetary reserve of $759,000 to account for any potential contract agreement with the teacher's contract pending. A lot of information there. Like I said, I'll get that out. It's even much further broken down on the packet that I will provide to the board. But again, it's just a little bit of an overview. So just to recap what we just did there, in 21-22, budgetary expenditures represent a 3.2% increase over the 19-20 actual expenditures. So, you know, you're crossing a whole school year. We don't know what 2021 holds in terms of actual expenditures yet, but this represents a 3.2% increase over what was 2 years ago. There are decreases in budgeted areas such as admin, construction improvements, business office, and pupil personnel. But there are some increases found in special education, which is an increase in cost on the district, as well as the technology department, function code 2800. And as I mentioned, this is primarily due to the implementation of our technology program, which kind of partly got off the ground, I would say, but that would be covered by ESSER funding. You could advance to the next slide. So one of the big costs to the district that I think, you know, often gets overlooked is our PSERS, which is our retirement. And if we go back to 20 years ago, it was really nice at 1.94%. As it currently stands, we're at 34.51% 20 years later. And you can see it is put out to the 27-28 school year at 38%. So this responsibility for the district is going to continue to grow. I heard numbers of 40% by 2030 before it starts to level off and drop back down. So this will continue to be a large expense for the district moving forward. And just to recap that, if we were to assume, and I hate to assume, but if we were to assume a flat salary expenditure for the next 6 years, which we know isn't going to happen, our PSERS contribution represents a gross increase of $1.8 million for the next 6 years, which, as we all know, we get some of that back. So it's a $946,000 net during that same period. That expenditure alone would account for one entire Act 1 increase for local revenue. So if we did nothing, we would be $946,400 in the hole, presuming that salaries were flat, which we know isn't going to be the case. So I just wanted to kind of hammer that home, that is a expense that the district is going to continue to have. It's going to continue to grow at a pretty dramatic rate over the next 6 years and well beyond. So when we look at the account code breakdowns, we had all those functions, and then we have all these objects inside the functions. Our salaries represent 32.77% of the district expenditure, which for the 21-22 school year would be $14,279,938. Our benefits is another 29.62% on top of that, which is $12,905,931. Again, that's a large portion of that is the PSERS, which we just talked about, but as well as our health plan. 7%, which is our purchased professional and technical services, which is $3 million. 0.95%, which is our purchased property services. 6.8 million in other purchase services. $945,000 in supplies. $346,000 in property. Other objects and other financing uses is our debt service. So if you want to scroll down, Mr. Cleaver, we can get a little bit further in depth as to what that means. 63% of our budget is salary and benefits. It's a pretty large number, pretty consistent with other school districts across the state. 65 seems to be the magic number. Right now we're at 63%. 7% of budget is professional services, which we just showed on the slide. Those include our intermediate unit payments, our BHA, behavioral health, our Vision Quest out in Mahoning Township there, our audit and legal fees, our CSIU network services, and other contracted services such as security and the crossing guards for the district. 16% of the budget is represented by other purchase services, which include our transportation, our technical school tuition, our higher education and LTRI-C tuition, our insurance, telecommunications, as well as our charter schools. 6% for other uses is our annual debt service and contingency for outstanding contract negotiations. And the 4.5% is for other expenditures, which includes our principal payment on debt service. If you want to go on to the next slide. So major impacts to the 2021 expenditures and the 21-22 budget. In the year 1920 or fiscal year 1920, the full year charter school expenditure for the district was $1,421,000. In 2021, year to date through February, it's $1.8 million, just under $1.9 million. This represents a 32.8% increase over the 1920 school year. Our charter school tuition is expected in 21 to 22 to be $3.1 million. That's $2.1 million in regular education and just over $1 million in special education. And that is a typo there. It should be 119% increase over the 1920 fiscal year. So again, that's 119% increase over what it was 2 years ago, coming in at $3.1 million. We currently have 206 students enrolled in cyber charter school, 214 additional students enrolled in our Lehighton Area Virtual Academy, which is basically the district provided charter school option. So there's been a lot of talk with the state budget as well as in other scholastic communities about enrollment in charter schools and the effects and impacts it has on our budget. If the state were to adjust the funding formula, obviously our expenditure would drop to $1,056,000. So quite a substantial savings to the district if that were to happen. If we were to see a 25% reduction in the students at cyber charter school, our expenditure reduction would be $595,000. And if we were to see a 50% reduction in student enrollment at cyber charter school, we would see an expenditure reduction of $1.4 million. I want to make it clear that this is not a specific obstacle for budgeting that only Lehighton faces. This is a topic for discussion in all districts, on all calls that I have been on with the IU and all the neighboring districts in Eastern Pennsylvania. I have heard some horror stories from other districts with cyber charter tuition expenditures in excess of $5 million annually, some in excess of $15 million annually. So this is a real problem for school districts on how to cover this expenditure. And we do realize that students have choices, but it is a real expense that we have to face and we have to work on covering. You can advance the slideshow. Just another slide here, because we talk about employees and we talk about salary, and we, when you put it all together, we talk about a teacher salary, and this is what you're kind of looking at here. This is a teacher cost example. This would be for a teacher at step 21 of a bachelor's degree. Their salary is $76,784. When you add their PSER, Social Security, and health insurance, and workman's comp insurance, and everything into that, that individual teacher costs us $127,326. Just for a point of reference, I believe 34.5% of our teachers are at or above that category. So 55 of our teachers would be at or above that category, presuming step movement with the next contract. And then on the contrary, to the right of that would be a new teacher starting. So that new teacher with a much lower salary and all their benefits and PSERs and Social Security and health plan with a single health plan, presuming they're not married and don't have children, that cost to the district is $68,954. So a dramatic cost example there of what one individual to the district costs when you add in their retirement, Social Security, health insurance, and other insurance. You can scroll on to the next slide. So this is kind of how it all rolls up. You have your local revenue of $22,603,000, state revenue 17,480,000, federal revenue of 2.2 million. Total estimated revenue $42,363,599, and a total estimated expenditures of $43,569,780. This is a total projected deficit of $1.2 million, $1,206,181. So again, there are some obstacles that we face with COVID and collection of revenue on local fronts. State funding is going to be held pretty consistent. Federal funding has already been reduced in the existing categories of your titles, Title I, Title II, and Title IV. So how do we balance this budget? That's not my sole decision to make. Obviously, presenting it to Finance Committee, well aware that many of the board members are on here. I'm going to provide that information in packet form to everybody with all the detail. They can analyze it. My goal would be to have another meeting in a week or so where questions can be answered and after they had time to review it. But I could have easily said, oh, well, we're getting all this federal funding and stimulus money. I could have put that in there and made that picture look really good. But I didn't want to do that because Lehighton does have a structural deficit. It was pointed out in several audits. And I think it's important to show it because if we just mask it with a one-time stimulus money, we're not showing the true picture. If you want to scroll on to the next slide, Mr. Cleaver. This is our ESSER 1, 2, 3. So ESSER 1 funding, you might want to reduce that a little. So ESSER 1 funding was just under $500,000. For the majority of that money, that's already been received. ESSER 2 money and ESSER 3 money. This comes right from the PASBO website of how that money is to be dispersed. So we can expect an additional $2.7 million in federal money in the 21-22 school year, an additional $2.9 million in the 22-23 school year, and then tailing off in the 23-24 school year down to 0.7. So there is kind of a cliff here that we have to be careful of. You don't want to add a bunch of reoccurring expenditures that you're not going to be able to pay for in the future. But you also want to be cognizant of the learning loss that has come with COVID and address those issues at hand. If you want to advance to the last slide. These are just my comments. Take them for what they're worth. Tell me I'm crazy. I'm okay with that. We as a district need to keep in mind we are an educational institution with the purpose to educate our students. The students should continue to be the baseline for all decision making. We need to avoid personal and political agendas from the process. We need to define ourselves by difference and strive for perfection. In the pursuit of that perfection, we will find excellence. We should settle for nothing less from our board, our community, our teachers, administrators, and our students. I stress we cannot continue to cut programs and resources such as technology, curriculum, supplies, textbooks, athletics, and social and emotional support that provide the necessary building blocks for our students to become vibrant and successful contributors to our society. We need to ask the simple question: do we want to be the district that others look to and say, that is how it should be done? Or do we want to be known as the district that others look at and say, what happened to them? To me, it's that simple. I think we need to take this step and lead by example and become the district we need to be. With that concludes the slideshow on the presentation. Mr. Cleaver, are we going to go right into the PFM?
Yes, we could do that and then come back
Yeah,
to
that's fine.
questions or comments and do
Yeah,
that.
that's
'Cause I
fine.
believe Zach and all them are on here. So give me a minute to bring them on board.
So we're going to jump over to PFM. This was brought up I believe Barb brought this up at the previous meeting. There was a presentation done last year for the district by PFM, and it kind of never really moved anywhere. We're not sure why. But we asked them to kind of rejuvenate the information and present it to the district again. This is a generation of cash flow for the district, which they will present here. They have a couple of slides to put up. They'll talk through it. They do a very good presentation, a very good job putting this information together for the district. And hopefully we find it valuable and we can make a decision as a district on what we want to do.
Okay, great. Can you all hear me? This is Zach.
Yes.
Okay, hi everybody. So I think JJ, Carly was going to share her screen and then she'll kind of navigate the presentation if that's possible. And
All right. Let me.
real quick while we get that teed up, I thought Ed made a couple good points there at the end. You know, PASBO and other Pennsylvania school associations and really national associations for school officials are all stressing to boards, you know, to be careful using this ESSER money to balance budgets and to do things like that, you know, to find one-time expenditures and, you know, really make sure you're thinking about how you use the money so you don't create, you know, additional future problems. I do think that's an important point that, you know, a lot of schools are struggling with that. We represent about half of them between PFM and RBCs on the phone, probably more than half in Pennsylvania. So I do want to back Ed up on that point. That's an important piece of this puzzle. And it kind of sets up nicely with, you know, what this presentation is going to be about, because we're also showing you something that, you know, you saw last year, that this is not meant to be something to help your budget kind of, you know, this coming budget or, you know, 2 years from now. This is meant to be, you know, one piece of kind of a multifaceted plan that gets the district back into, you know, a type of situation where you don't have cash flow crunches. You don't have to look to potentially needing to do cash flow borrowings each year to make sure you can, you know, meet your expenditures. You know, it's to kind of, you know, get back on good footing. All right. So that's going to what we're going to present. I don't see anything on the screen yet.
I think I need permission to be able to share my screen as a participant.
Here, I can try to pull it up quick. Hold on a second. Yeah, it's not letting me share
Zach,
you.
is that Carly?
Yes, that's Carly here, PFM.
And I'll just stall a little bit more here while we get organized.
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
Should be set now.
Okay. And so last year you saw, really it's the same plan as last year, except this type of plan, quote unquote, expires each November because you make payments on your debt. So this is kind of the revamped version of the plan that is now valid for this year. You can take advantage of this kind of this summer so that we could close the transaction before this November if you want to proceed. So Carly, let's go down to the first page.
Okay.
So the interest rates remain extremely low. Oh, and I forgot to mention, so you have Zach and Carly from PFM on, and then you have Brian Bradley and Allie Mackey on from RBC Capital Markets. They're your underwriter. Okay, so we all put this together as a group. And so the interest rate chart shows you the same thing that we told you last year, which is interest rates kind of still remain at all-time lows, which helps a restructuring like this because it doesn't have quite as much of a cost to doing it. You know, what we're going to show you has a pro and a con. It's a benefit, but there's also a negative to doing it. And so with a low interest rate environment, it helps to reduce the con of doing this debt restructuring. So that's an important piece of this. Rates have kind of remained low all through last year. And if you scroll down a little bit, Carly, on the chart, you can see they've come off the low point over the last 2 months, but they're still at historically low levels. So that's the good news. If you go to the next page, this is your debt summary. Now, this is a page that kind of goes back to what Ed was just talking about with your budget. Okay, your debt portfolio is made up of different series of bonds and notes, and that's columns 2 through 7. And then over in column 8 is the amount of debt that you pay each year in your budget. Okay, so you're running about $4 million. Now you get a significant amount of state reimbursement. You get about $1 million plus of state reimbursement every year. So when you look at the bottom half of this page, column 16 shows the net number. So you're going to pay column 8, and then you're going to have a receivable, I believe, in your budget for $1 million plus that comes back to you in the form of state reimbursement. So that's how your debt looks now if you do nothing. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to target 2 specific bond issues, the 2015 A's and the 2014 TD Bank note. And we're going to restructure certain principal maturities and interest payments of those 2 bonds. And we're going to create 2 years of relief in your debt service budget. All right. So let's go to the next page. The next page is, there's a lot of words on here. It's a little bit more of a leave behind. If you go back and review this, you can kind of remember what we're talking about. So I've described a lot of this already. But the point of this is, again, to restructure certain maturities just to create 2 years of budgetary relief or cash flow relief, so that you can, from the administration standpoint, I believe the goal of this is to help you build back your fund balance, again, to kind of alleviate cash flow problems and cash flow crunches. Okay. And when you go down kind of under bullet 2, A, B, C, D there, I think item C is extremely important. That you can't lower your debt service budget for the next 2 years just because you're going to pay less, because that would create a pretty big problem 3 years from now when your debt service goes back to where you're paying now. And we'll show you this in numbers form here in a second. It'll make more sense. But you have to leave the same debt service budget in place that you have now. And then you're going to create 2 years where you're going to pay less than what you're budgeting. And then it's our understanding that that money is to then be put back into the district's reserves so that you can start to build up a reserve. And then this will help you, for a number of reasons, including with your credit rating in the future, so that you can potentially refinance all these other bond issues as we get to their call dates. So real quick, I'm going to pause before we go into the actual numbers. Does anybody have any questions? Does this sound familiar from last year? Hopefully. This was like last August, I believe.
I remember it, yes.
Okay,
No
good.
questions for me. Yeah, sounds very familiar last year.
Good. Okay, so let's go to the next page is the page you care about. It's the numbers. So Carly, flip to that. So it's a slightly different format than last year, but it's spitting out kind of the same message. Okay, so we'll go kind of through this, top to bottom, left to right. At the top in that gray banner, it explains what we're doing. So we're restructuring portions of your debt to provide short-term relief in the 22 and 23 budgets only. Okay, and then we're going to leave all the rest of your debt alone. And so if you start over on the left in columns 1 and 2, you see your annual budgetary year, right? And then in column 2, that shows your debt service net of the reimbursement that you get if you do nothing. So column 2 matches that page we just showed you, 2 minutes ago. And so what we're going to do is in column 3, we're going to refund and restructure payments in the 22 and 23 budget years. So that's coming out of column 2. So you start with column 2, you subtract column 3, okay? And then what we do with the debt that we refunded up front, we actually have to go, Carl, if you can scroll down a little bit, we have to put that debt somewhere. So we actually put it all the way out in 2039, 2040, and all the way out to 2043. If you see that in columns 4, 5, we have 2 column 5s, but columns 4, 5, and 5. So that's the debt that we restructure it and we take it out and then we put it on the long end. And so then column 6 is where you'd end up when all the dust settles. So you'd have 2 years where your debt service payment is significantly lower than what you're going to have in your budget. Okay. And then it's going to jump right back up to $3 million in 2024. So that's why on that previous page, when we said you can't change your debt service budget, that's what we mean. Because if you lowered your budget to be 1.6 million the following year under Act 1, you would never be able to get your budget back up to $3 million. You'd have a big problem. So you have to follow the rules and the plan of this restructuring in order for it to be effective. But so what that would do then is in column 7, as you see, it'd free up $1.8 million to start to build a reserve in the 22 budget, $1.2 million the following year. And then every year after that, your payment would go up about $120,000. So when you compare columns 2 and column 6, that's kind of the difference. Okay. And then on the long years, when you go down column 7 on the long years, it looks like it goes up significantly more. That's because there wasn't debt in those years. That's where we're filling in the debt. But really your budgeted number, when you scroll down column 6, your budgeted number would need to stay at about 3.2 million. And once you have your budget funded at that, it just kind of runs level all the way out to the maturity of your debt, out 20 years. And then Carly, if you scroll down a little bit more, this is kind of a visual version of this. So the black line is where your debt is now. So we're going to take out those 2 upfront years, create those 2 gaps for you to build reserves. And then the yellow and the red and the orange are kind of where we're layering the additional debt on top. So you can see, where it hits your budget. And like I said, as long as you kind of leave 3.2 million in there, you're basically good until the maturity of the debt. But there is an increase to your debt. So back to the beginning when we were talking about pros and cons, the pro is obviously you get cash flow relief. You can start to build a reserve. The con is this does have a long-term cost because you're taking short debt and you're putting it out long, to create that relief. And that's where the con is. So let's pause again. And I've been going on and on. I don't know if RBC has anything to add, or if Ed or JJ want to say anything that I'm forgetting.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm been with the district since December, but I've lived in the district for 20 plus years. And going back to kind of my presentation, there was some time here where we added a significant amount of debt to the district, and we really didn't add the tax increase to support that debt. So, I realize I'm a taxpayer, and everybody on this call is a taxpayer, and nobody likes to add, extra taxes. But if we added an expenditure and we didn't account for it with a repeating revenue, that's a problem. That's a problem for the district. It's a problem for everybody. So if it was a one-time expenditure and, 5 years later it fell off the cliff and we struggled through, okay. But this is obviously a long-term expenditure going out to 2044 that we have to be able to pay for. And I think looking back at that slide that I presented where taxes pretty much stayed consistently where they were, and there was minimal increases over 10 years, roughly 2% over 10 years, we didn't properly plan years ago to accommodate this debt for the future. So the expense has to come from somewhere.
And as I mentioned before, so the district did receive, a downgrade or 2 over the past few years, just based on financial performance. One of the other things that you want to have the ability to do in the future is to lower this debt service burden by refinancing your existing debt. And to the extent that you can get your credit rating back into the A category, that will help you save more money on those refinancing opportunities. And that was supposed to be kind of part of the plan over the 20-year period. We always talked about preserving the ability to refinance your debt in the future. So that's just one other piece of the puzzle I want to remind you of.
And that was one of the questions I had. So these savings here are coming completely from basically pushing off 2 years of expenses to the end of the loan, not from anything really being refinanced to a lower interest rate. Those
correct.
Come later.
This, if you look at the last column, probably scroll up a little bit. This is actually a dis savings. You get cash flow relief, but long term, it costs you $2.2 million over the 21 year period.
Right.
And then when you present value that 2.2 million, which is usually the way you evaluate these, it costs you, almost 700,000 in the long run. So this is not lowering your debt service burden over the long run. This is just meant to create this upfront relief to kind of give you some one-time monies to kind of, get back on your feet, or whatever you want to call it. But
This is the first piece of the puzzle to get the debt rating back up, so that then down the road, some of those higher interest bonds can be refinanced.
yes, and that is the perfect way to say it, because this is one piece of the puzzle. This alone will do nothing. You have to do this in conjunction with whatever other things, Ed and JJ are helping you through with your budget.
Right.
You have to kind of do it all together so that the formula works at the end of the day, and you can, get back to, 3 to 5 years from now, this is where you're, want to be.
Okay.
Rita, do you have any questions or thoughts?
I have thoughts. I don't have any questions. I mean, I understand it's a kind of a double-edged sword in some respects, because we are pushing the debt out, but I agree with Nathan that it's important that we get our bond rating back to where we need it to be for future savings. So I'm okay with it as much as I can be.
Sure.
That aspect, this is Brian Bradley from RBC. That aspect is really, really important, because basically 35 million of, which is roughly 60% of your debt, is going to be callable between now and 2023.
Yes. And if we do, I mean, will our bond rating go back up by, I doubt by 2023, but maybe by 24 or 25, right?
That's a hard question. We can't give you.
I know.
Yeah, we can't give you a great answer. I mean, I would 2 years, if you do the things that that Ed and JJ are working on with you, I'm sure whatever they're telling you, with this, if you rebuild your fund balance, if you show balanced budgets, typically the rating agencies like to see 2 or 3 years of a track record of that.
Yes.
So that, 2 years would be early. That would be the earliest version of them being willing to kind of take rating action. 3 years is more of a reasonable time frame, assuming you're following kind of all the prescribed medications for this.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that.
Yep. And so we'll flip to the timeline quick, and then we can come back to the numbers if anybody has a question. So the timeline is meant to be a no pressure timeline. I mean, you have this opportunity exists into kind of early fall. Okay. Last year we started this process in, June, and then we approved the debt resolution in, I think it was in August or September. But, there was definitely a lot of questions really about what was really happening. The financing team was not comfortable that everyone was really committed to this. And we ended up kind of letting the opportunity expire. Okay. So like I said, we're restarting this process. We would need to pass a new debt resolution if you want to do this. And so the way we set up the timeline was to try to give everyone time to think about it, but to still kind of keep things moving along. So, tonight's April 12th. This is just for information. We don't need anything from you. And then you have a meeting on April 26th. So I don't know if the, finance committee, if you're all interested in this, you can tell the board about it, or, however you want to do it, but to kind of get it on people's radar screens. And I think we did send this presentation to you, so, it can be distributed if needed. And then May 10th would be, if you decide you want to do something, that's the earliest you could authorize us to proceed. Doesn't have to happen on May 10th, but, on that night you could say, okay, financing team, we're ready to get the paperwork started. Doesn't necessarily commit you to doing this, but it gets things moving, because there's a lot of work that has to happen behind the scenes with us and with the administration in order to get into a place where you could actually do something. And then so the earliest date that you could do something after that would be a resolution could be available for your May 24th meeting. Okay. And then once that's approved, then we can kind of finish the paperwork process. We don't want to finish the paperwork process until you approve that resolution, because then you start to incur fees with the rating agency. Last year we did all this work, but but the district didn't have to pay anything because most of this you can do without any of the professionals charging. But once we get the credit rating done, they charge a fee. So we want to make sure before we actually have the rating interview that we're committed to doing something. So that's kind of why we have that towards the end of this timeline. And then, this timeline basically gets us to an interest rate lock in July. All right. Now, like I said, we can do it a little bit slower. So if you wanted to slide everything back a month, you can just kind of use this as your guide. So if we, we kept talking about it in April and May, and then you approve something in June, that would get you to like an August interest rate lock. But this is just meant to give you an idea of how quickly we can move, which is, it's not the quickest process in the world, as you can see.
So Zach, is there like a timeline? Is there like a time period where we might be getting like close to saying, hey, we might not be able to get this done? Or
I think an August resolution would mean that we're pricing kind of, sometime in September and then settling sometime in October. That's probably where we're going to get tight, because we have to, Brian and Allie and Carly, correct me if I'm wrong, I think November 1st is the first payment date on one of these bond issues. So we have to settle the transaction before November 1st.
okay.
And so working backwards, that's about an August resolution.
I think they're November 15th.
November 15th. Okay. Yep.
I believe so.
Yeah. So August. Yeah. Your August meeting date would be the last kind of date before we probably have to, restart this again for the following year. So you have a little bit of time to think about. We want you to be comfortable with this because it is a pro and a con situation. It's not, just a no-brainer. You have to think about it. You have to understand what's happening. But if used in conjunction with the other tools, this can be, a helpful way to right the ship, over a multi-year period. So I think that's kind of it. Happy to go back to the numbers if you want to talk about those, or if you have any other questions. Or
I have no questions. I think I will look it over, and I'm fine with what you've presented so far. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Yep, and same here. Thank you for coming.
Sure, no problem. Okay, I think that's it. Ed, we'll hand it back to you if you're all set.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely, and we'll wait to hear from you all. Just let us know what you want to do.
Okay.
All right, thanks everybody. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
So that concludes the presentations. Mr. Cleaver, I don't know if there's any questions from the public.
Mr. Rick, before we go there, I just had one quick question. The budget numbers that you presented, did that include the CARES money in the estimated income portion?
62% of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Just for the next fiscal year.
Okay.
So and like I said, I could have put it all in there and made it balanced, but then I think we're hiding reality.
Okay. So that's where that comment was going, the difference between putting in what we'll actually receive that year.
Yeah.
And all the work.
Correct.
Okay. That
We
makes sense.
will have to document that information
Right.
and show it as a receipt of revenue. And yes, it will, I can tell you through conversation with other school districts, there is investment in technology, which we're proposing. I'm going to be honest with you, some of the horror stories I hear in the district of teachers using technology that's 10 years old. A lot of our outdated technology for our younger students, which are our iPads, can't get batteries replaced in them anymore. It's really unfortunate, but I think we need to get that program in place and then have a reoccurring replacement cycle of some of those technology pieces,
Right.
so that it's not such a huge expense.
That makes sense.
In addition, some of the other expenditures from other districts, they're using it to cover costs of operating. So things like transportation, things like existing salaries, for continuity of service. So, yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that could be done. But like I said, I think it's important that we don't go and add 15 teachers to the payroll that 3 years from now we have to figure out how to pay.
Right.
Or, we don't enter into some agreement or whatever it might be, that it's going to be a continual expenditure that we just can't pay 3 years from now when we go off the cliff and all the federal funding is gone.
Right.
Okay.
I also think, Mr. Eric, I'm sorry, I just wanted to comment. I also think that we still don't know exactly what education is going to look like in the years coming forward. And it's very important for us to make sure that we can sustain ourselves without additional help from federal or state government, because we don't really know what anything's coming our way. We're heading down the Niagara River without knowing what the heck's coming up ahead. So
I absolutely agree. I think the necessity of change has come upon us with COVID. I think there's a different way of looking at education now, just because we were forced to look at it differently. Especially at like the high school level. I know we have talked about this in other groups, but different modes of education are upon us. And you are absolutely right. We need to be self-sufficient as a district. We can't rely on a one-time ESSER fund or a two-time ESSER fund influx of money into the district and then wonder what we're going to do in 3 years when it's gone.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Eric.
You're welcome.
We do have several comments from the public. We'll start with Mr. Bradley. Mr. Bradley?
I'm here. Okay. This board has proven over the past decade that it completely lacks the discipline to not only form a balanced budget, including the one that was presented today, months late, but also adhere to the budget that they have passed in the past. So the first question I have is Zach still on the line? Zach, are you still on the line?
No, I think he got off, Mr. Bradley.
This is a committee meeting. The people should have a right to speak during the meeting. The fact that you have stopped them prior to these budget items is bad, but let's just move on. To get the cash flow relief, can't we just spend less than we take in for a few years? The next question we're going to have to ask, which the answer to that is obviously yes, people, and that's the responsibility of this board. This report that he gave us, it just says that we're adding $2 million of more debt to a district that already borrowed too much and mismanaged their funds. That's completely irresponsible of a board to not only spend more than they take in, but then to kick this can down the road, costing future people $2.2 million more than what they do. If we just budget to spend less than we take in, we will improve our credit rating. And that, again, is a problem that this past board, and if we look at the Auditor General's report, the actions of Larry Stern, Wayne Wentz, Steve Holland, that are still on this board, and the past board members that spent millions of dollars with the NEF, that $1.6 million that you showed as an expense, that's the amount of money that you're trying to recoup that was taken from this district and given to NEF and stipends and other dollars that were not provided student education. So when you go back to your budget and you go all the way back up, yep, that's the adjustment, but keep going back up to the budget where you're looking at the different categories. I sat down with Ed along with Joy to review some of these things and other districts. And during that meeting, we found out that no one else on this board had sat down and met with Ed. And this is April, and our budget year started in July of last year. So I think this board is irresponsible. I beg that you don't be idiotic and go down the path where you borrow more to get one-time relief for past mistakes and kick the can down the road, it seems completely foolish. And I'd like to hear from the board members in this committee why they wouldn't open this up to the public during his presentation while he was still in the room so we could review this information. And secondly, this board apparently recommended, 3 of you voted to recommend board docs, again, taking official action in a committee meeting without first asking the public for their opinion as required by the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act. Thank you. I'd like a response.
Next comment or question, Mr. Cleaver?
I'd like a response.
Can you hear me okay?
I'd like a
Yes,
response.
Barb.
Okay, I too would have liked to have asked PFM a couple of questions. However, when is the 2014 note paid off? If I remember correctly, if memory serves, it's 5 years, that's completely gone. Is that correct?
Yeah, I want to say 2026, but I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, so that's approximately 5 years. I could pull it up, but it would take me a few minutes. It might crash my computer. I don't
Oh, yeah.
believe that there's a ton of money left owed on that.
Ms. Bose, I'm sorry, what was the question? See if we could look.
Yeah, go ahead
What
down,
is
Mr. Cleaver.
The 2014 banknote,
Keep scrolling down.
I think that's paid off in 5 years.
Yeah, 2026.
Okay. And I can't see that. My eyes aren't that good. So we owe approximately 5 million. That's a rough figure. And paid off in 5 years. I realize that we have a cash flow issue, but it seems to me to extend that small amount of debt doesn't make any sense. I don't know what to tell you there, except I don't think it's a good idea.
Well, Barb, we could do this. We could have them also do. So my thought is this is a much smaller group with much less attendance than a normal board meeting.
Right.
So my thought would be to have them do the same thing at the board meeting, and then that gives more public attendance, that draws more public attendance. And then, we could have them as well stay available to answer questions like this.
Yeah, I mean, if it would have been nice if they could have stayed to answer questions, because I wanted to know, with the presentation they gave, we go to 5% interest on the EC note, the 2015A, in 2 years. And how does that figure in? Because our interest rate will drop, jump, I think 2%, but I'm not positive. Don't quote me on that. The other question I had was, actually, it's more of a statement. I think a big part of our cyber costs for this year was the fact that we did not offer transportation. Parents had to make a decision. Transportation, at least, was mostly added back in on August 24th, but parents had to make decisions, and they did so prior to. Well, in your budget report on the cost of transportation, Ed, does that take into account our reimbursement from the state?
Yeah, that actually shows up. So the 1.3 million is the total expenditure.
Right.
The reimbursement from the state shows up in revenue. So yeah, you're correct. The total expenditure, when you include the reimbursement from the state, would be less than that.
Do you know how much?
But, I want to say roughly $432,000
Less?
than the 1.3 million.
Okay, so that would put us roughly around $900,000.
Right, correct.
All right. Another question I had, when I tried to get on this meeting, it said that the host was in another meeting. Was there a meeting prior to this that we didn't know about?
Yes, we had an executive meeting prior to this that will be announced at our next. board
Okay,
meeting.
because
Yep.
I didn't see it on anything, so that's what I was asking.
Yep.
I know I had other questions. Give me a second here. I'm old, I forget.
You had asked me about state revenues, Barb, and where we were.
Right,
prior-
as opposed to what we're supposed to receive and what is yet to be received.
Right. So I did a little research on that. We're still due just under $4 million in basic education funding. The largest portion of that typically comes in on June 1st. Roughly $3 million of that is kind of a one-time payment June 1st. We are due a smaller payment of around $1 million at the end of April. And then there are some other special ed funding that we haven't received yet. And then Social Security reimbursement and retirement reimbursement. So total from the state, we're due about $4.3 million roughly, due by the end of the school year.
Okay. So
And
it's
then-
only 4.3 million then, it's not roughly 4.3 million.
Yeah, it's pretty close to 4.3 million.
Okay, and you said that includes the PESers and everything else that they reimburse us for.
That would be correct, yes.
Okay. Hopefully PFM did put up or send to you the presentation so that it can get online. I would like to see this online for it to be discussed.
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
I mean, it's easier when you're looking at it and have the time to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would have had more questions probably had it been available prior to, although I understand why it was not.
Yeah, and we're also planning, Barb, too, to, like Ed said, to have them back, and that way you'll have time to look at it and you get a little bit of a understanding of what some people are actually looking at. And that's why we kind of have that extended timeline available to give people more of a opportunity to ask questions. And again, PFM will be back, once we had time to digest that.
Okay, now, what is our cash flow look? How is it looking at the moment?
I'll be honest, I think we are actually in a pretty good position to finish out the school year. Obviously, I know, last year was COVID kind of putting an end to anything, and the previous year was a little tight. I think there's roughly, I had to guess $9 million in our holding accounts, which is our general fund and food service, as well as our payroll account. And then that, coupled with the additional state funding that's due, should carry us through well into the July time period before we start to receive local property tax revenue again in August and September.
Okay, that is good to hear. Next question. As far as, and you may not know this, Ed, as far as receiving the tax bills for the school property taxes, are we not going to receive them again until August, or has that timeline been put back to July like it used to be?
That I can't answer.
Like I said, you weren't involved in switching tax, whoever printed the tax bills, so.
Yeah, I can reach out to the assessment office. I know they just had a woman up there retired and was replaced. And I had reached out a month or so
I
ago.
think it was the printer that was the issue.
Okay, I was told there was some issue with the assessment in the desk, but I could definitely look into it.
I'm talking about in previous years, we switched printers.
Okay.
We switched printers and then it was back a month or 6 weeks the first year.
Okay.
The one thing I don't know, and it's kind of hard to find looking at the budgeted expenses, was did we actually save money when we had them printed by the tax collectors, because I know they used to do that. I just don't know if it's something we should look at to go back to doing. I don't know if there was a savings, was it even significant? I know we used to approve our budget earlier, somewhat earlier in the year, which gave the tax collectors time to print and mail the tax bills. So I don't know. I mean, I know we, or you guys voted to use, I think it's Burke One or whatever, to print our tax bills. When it did switch, I know we did not have a motion to approve it because I looked. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention was using Diligent for board docs. We already have that. I'm not sure at what level we have it, but our board docs are already interactive and it's powered by Diligent.
Our board docs are only for policy.
Okay, so it
Yep.
only includes policy.
Yeah.
Now, when we went to that, is it the same plan that we're on now?
No, the current plan we're on now is actually presented from our PSBA. Actually offers it as part of the belonging to PSBA. So all we have access to is their PSBA board docs to put our policies inside the board docs. So when you go into click on our policies, it actually sends you then to that board docs website, which is
Right.
actually a different site.
Right, but it does say powered by Diligent. Now,
Right. Yep.
so that is included in what we pay BSBA, is that correct?
Yeah. PSBA gives us the approval for board docs just for policy.
Okay. Now, since that's included with what we pay them and whatever they charge us per year, if we get our own access through Diligent, does that mean our payment to PSBA would be lower?
No,
I do not believe that would be the case. No, I suppose.
no.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're putting out money to get less benefit, more or
Well,
less.
you're purchasing the program and that level that you'd be purchasing, that board docs falls under that level of purchase, like for doing the agendas and the policies and everything. So to get the program to be able to produce the agendas and all the other functions and the search engines that we talked about, that board docs piece that we currently have falls underneath that approval.
Okay, now would the plan that we are purchasing, would that include uploading the minutes?
I believe that is all included, but I would have to.
I mean, because that being searchable would help, especially for the minutes, because the agendas are not generally that long.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And if you have more, I know you went over what that included.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's in there, but it's like a 6-page what it includes sheet. We could put it up on the website as well and clarify that information, but I'm pretty sure that is included.
Well, that would be nice. I mean, because that would be the big benefit that I could see if it made the minutes searchable. That would be, at least for me.
Yeah, I think anything we put on, anything we load to the site becomes searchable on the site, which is a very nice feature.
Okay, does that mean then it's still retained at the local level though?
Yes, that has to still be kept.
Okay, all right. I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we have one more individual. Yes.
Hi, it's Gloria Bowman.
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you. Ed, is there, within the budget for 21-22, is there a curriculum item, a line item at all? I know you have the supplies, but how about curriculum, like any textbooks that are possibly on a rotation cycle and so on and so forth? Yes,
actually, this was discussed pretty in depth. That was there is curriculum money in the budget as well as textbook money. We're working with the middle school and the math department and some of the other departments on what was required. It was very disturbing to learn that in the past year, due to cuts, they did not have the workbooks they needed for students and textbooks that were needed for students. So I definitely put that in there and included it.
Can you tell me where that is?
What's that?
Can you, do you mind telling me what, is it under, other, no, you don't have other instructional. Is it under?
It's under, well, you're not going to see it in there because that's just
Okay.
kind of a summary sheet. It's under the
Okay.
1110.
Okay, 1110, yeah, okay.
1110 function code, and then I think it's in the 650, 640 is
Okay.
books, 610 is general supplies. So it falls under there.
Okay. Only because I know that we did talk about that too in Title I, about our reading series. That was also discussed at our last meeting. And I also knew we always had a line item budget for curriculum textbooks on a rotation cycle. So I'm
Right. And there is some discussion too about, possibly updating some curriculum with the cycle
Right.
and investing money in that process.
Yes, Gloria, we did talk about that actually at our last administrative meeting as well.
Oh, okay.
And looking at the ELA curriculum at the elementary level and begin revamping it and looking at learning loss, because really all our curriculums are going to have to be reviewed because we all know there's learning loss. And there is, and I believe it's 20% of some of the ESSER 3 funds have to be towards learning loss.
Correct. Yes, correct.
So we already we're in that process. I'll call it a review process in the very early stages to look at it. But that is our plan for next year to kind of look at those curriculum areas. And then, maybe it's not textbooks we need, but different resources, especially looking at some of the revamps too, because we are working on a technology plan also. I know Ed had that discussion about putting it in to make sure we have a replacement type program. And many of these, as you're aware, many of these new programs are predominantly online, as for their major resources and those type of things. So that's all part of the review, and so we are actually, that was a big part of our discussion at our last administrative meeting.
Well, I appreciate Ed putting in the comments about educating children and, looking at our curriculum and resources and so on. And Rita's right. We don't know down the road what education is going to look like in 3-4 years, So my second question, you said there was reimbursement for the debt service from the state. If the board decides to go with that plan to renegotiate the first 2 years, is that still in place for reimbursement if that bond payment is lower, debt payment is lower?
So we would still receive reimbursement on the bonds that weren't refinanced. The new refinance bonds would obviously fall into a refinancing structure different than what they are, or a reimbursement structure different than what they are today. So the reimbursement timing would change as well as the value would change because it's based off of what you pay.
Correct.
So if we were paying less this year or next year, we would obviously get less of a reimbursement.
Right. When does that reimbursement usually come through? Is that in June too?
No, that's actually sooner. So when we pay in November, which is typically the larger payments, because that's when we're getting our tax revenue. That reimbursement usually comes in January, February. And then we also make payments in May, and those get booked as the fiscal year as reimbursements, but they're typically received in July. And then when the audit comes, they just get adjusted back to the previous year.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
No other comments at this time?
Okay, well, thank you for everybody for participating. Our next scheduled meeting for finance is May 10th, 2021. And like I said, we will work to get these documents on the website as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.